till 3 or 4 years after he died that I got into the sport. Shortly after his death, I applied for a job at Hamilton, but it wasn't right, and I probably wasn't ready to switch into racing properly then. But having gone through the interview process at Hamilton, it really made me realise, yeah, this is what I want to do. And when the opportunity came up at Sandown, I grabbed it with both hands. And I would probably say to you, how many people in life know what they want to do, get the chance to do it, and find it's exactly what they thought it was? And for me, going to work every day is a pleasure, not a chore. I'm doing what I really want to do. And hopefully that comes across to likes of you who have to deal with me. So I'm very lucky, but I got in the old-fashioned way that I was known. I don't think 20 or 30 years later, if I was trying to get into racing now, that would apply.
Okay, well, that's really interesting background. And I believe now you've mentioned a few racecourses that you have been involved with, but you're not directly involved with one single racecourse now. So can you tell us more about your role at the Jockey Club? Yeah,
I mean, in my time, I was racing manager at Sandown. I was operations manager across the whole 3 London courses, the task of delivering the first Saturday derbies. Then I was general manager and managing director of Epsom for several years. I then moved to Newmarket, and then 10 years ago I was not very well again. And before I was ill, we'd been talking about this slightly wider, more strategic role. And after I'd been ill, and I was off work for 6 months, it was a no-brainer to move away from direct racecourse management, which would probably have put me in a box, into a role that is... It's about, my skill is I know nothing, but I do know people. And it's using that skill on a global stage where the Jockey Club has always had strong links with racing jurisdictions around the world. The Jockey Club, when it was the regulator, was one of the founders of the IFHA, the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities, and are still a member of that. And we need to keep our links abroad to enable the odd commercial opportunities.
Now, apart from your role in sort of spreading the word internationally, if you like, for racing, I understand you're also very heavily involved in trying to make improvements for owners, trainers and stable staff, and you've been doing a lot of that in the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's something that's very dear to my heart. It makes common sense, and however much progress has been made, we must never get complacent. We must look after the people who are so key to the sport. If you think about the treatment of owners 15 years ago, racecourses had no knowledge of who the owners were. They were just, we're looking after, to put it bluntly, we're looking after the trainer's customer for them. There was no appreciation that actually owners were a customer group of racecourses. But then with the advent and growth of media money, it made it much easier to argue, actually, they are our direct customers too. And it was a whole sea change in attitude. And attitude is a key word, because it's not just the badges, the free lunches, the facilities. It's the attitude of all the staff who come into contact with owners when they're racing. And I believe racecourses have made massive improvements in the last 10 years. But as I say, there's still more to do. And one area that, Simon, I'm very keen on is developing the right structure and pyramid so that syndicate members are treated in their own unique way. It's impossible to treat a syndicate of 20 people, 30 people, in the same way as you do treat the sole owner. But it is possible to give a syndicate experience whereby everyone feels valued and happy. A classic example would be the paddock. The paddock is the ultimate area of anticipation in racehorse ownership. It's the moment when you're in real contact and you're really looking forward to the race. Although as an owner, there's nothing you can do about it, but you can share the professionals' moment before they enter combat.
Sure.
For want of another phrase. However, if you look at a paddock like Epsom, there is only a certain number of people that you can get in there safely. And there are even smaller paddocks than Epsom. And it's a balance. You want to let in as many people as you can, but you can't let everybody in. And I know it's a huge frustration to a lot of syndicate subscribers that they don't get into the paddock. And we don't necessarily explain it well, but we have to show a degree of flexibility where we can. But in doing so, we have to work with the syndicate managers and get them on our side, and also persuade the syndicate managers, if we can show flexibility today when there's only 7 runners in the race, I'm really sorry, but 2 weeks' time, you've got another runner here, there's 20 runners in the race, and we don't have the space in the paddock. So it's about building all that mutual trust and working with people so that they understand we're trying to help, but we could become, as racecourses, victims of being helpful and flexible when occasionally we have to say we can't. Does that? I think we've had this conversation before, but I hope that makes sense.
It does. It's all about flexibility on both sides and expectation management, isn't it? And if you can get that right, then everything else should really flow quite easily. Phil, I think you wanted to come in here because I know that you've got an affinity with Epsom Racecourse, and I've got a feeling that, Stephen, you're also very keen to promote Epsom. So, Phil.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, Stephen, we talked there about racecourses, but I know that Jockey Club does other things away from the racecourses that perhaps people don't appreciate. I know the first time we spoke was the first time I really sort of got my head around the fact that you managed the shared gallops at Epsom and I think Newmarket as well. Can you tell us a bit more about what else the Jockey Club's responsible for away from the racecourses?
Yeah, I'd love to, and talk about Epsom. I think one of the key things that we're not just Jockey Club racecourses. The Jockey Club has historical links to every part of the sport, and in some ways it is still the custodian of the sport. And managing the training grounds at Newmarket, Epsom and Lambourne is a very key part of that. And indeed, Jockey Club Estates, inverted commas, saved the Lambourne gallops when they bought them about 12 years ago. And in fact, the Lambourne trainers would say have significantly improved the facilities at Lambourne by taking over the management. Mm-hmm. Ironically, at the time, the Newmarket trainers were up in arms. Why were we expanding away from Newmarket? Epsom's a unique place where the gallops are owned by the racecourse and they're not managed by Jockey Club Estates. They're overseen by Jockey Club Estates. But they're an absolutely critical part of what I call the microeconomy of the Epsom Downs, which is a unique public open space owned by a private company, the Jockey Club, governed by its own Act of Parliament, the Epsom and Walton Downs Regulation Act, for the benefit of all users. And if you think of Yes Prime Minister, it's the perfect Sir Humphrey piece of legislation, and that it gives all the users of Epsom Downs rights and all of them obligations. Although I think it would be fairly fair to say that only Epsom and Ewell Borough Council and the racecourse honour all their obligations. Most other people think it's just common land and public open space and can do what they like. But there's a whole education piece we're doing at the moment to ensure that the training of racehorses is not affected, and that the training that everyone locally understands under that Act of Parliament, the training of racehorses in the morning have a precedent over everything else. And it's a wonderful place to be. You're half an hour from central London. From the top of the gallops on Epsom Downs, you can see from Wembley to Docklands and see your horse coming up an all-weather gallop or a grass gallop.
You and I first spoke when you called me to see how you could encourage more syndicates to have horses at Epsom. So why is that a passion of yours? What was the motives behind that?
I firmly believe syndicates are the future, and the catchment area for Epsom is huge. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely huge. So if part of being the experience of owning a horse is seeing your horse on the gallops in the morning and being linked to the team of a yard as well as the team of a syndicate, if you have a training centre which has got, 10 million people plus within 10 square miles of it, it's probably got more chance of finding new subscribers to the syndicate than if you are in Newmarket, Middleham, Lambourne, or Neil Mulholland down in the West Country. I use him because we were talking about him earlier. I'm a big fan of his. But the catchment area, the potential for getting new subscribers into a syndicate has to be huge around Epsom.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, and I would support that. I love going up to Epsom Downs to watch my horses on the gallops. So the more people we can get up there, the better.
Well, I think between the two of you, you've given Epsom a really good boost there. The trainers at Epsom will be delighted. So well done, the two of you there. Now, Stephen, the pandemic obviously has affected everybody. It's affected everybody in racing. But can you give us a view on its effect on racing in general and Jockey Club courses in particular?
I'll answer that first from a human perspective. We live to run race days and big events. To run them with nobody there is absolutely soul-destroying. But luckily, because we were classified as elite sports venues, we were able to run them. If you can think that racecourses had been classified as a leisure venue, we'd have been shut, like every health club, like every restaurant, like every shop. But racing was able to carry on, thank goodness for all of us involved in the sport at every level. But running without crowds meant there was no atmosphere, and it was really, really strange. And then when owners were allowed back, well, the owners' experience initially, last July onwards, was pretty odd because nobody by then was used it. And even when owners were allowed back, we were having to deal with constant changes. If you think of us as an elite sports event, we have rules and regulations, we have safety advisory groups, and Public Health England were getting involved. And the message was changing the whole time. So the amount of times we had to change how we were operating is it's staggering. And at the same time, we had to try and gently explain to people, well, the reason I know you can now do that in the high street because the pubs are open again, but we are being governed by elite sports venue rules, not by leisure venue rules. But I don't have to sit down when I go somewhere else. Unfortunately, for us to be allowed to operate, that's what we have to do. And it was a real challenge explaining to people as initially owners and then for a while small crowds and then only owners again, why we had to make rules that they thought were just officious on our behalf in order to carry on running the sport. But the reality is it's rules that we were being made to apply as opposed to the rules we'd invented ourselves. And luckily now they've all gone. One other thing is the interpretation of guidance from the centre was pretty different by every regional Public Health England office. So when you run a group of racecourses, you then got a layer of criticism. Well, you're saying I can't do this at Nottingham, but I can do it at Sandown. And the reason being is you've got different Public Health England and different Safety Advisory Group interpretation of central guidance. So you could say it's been challenging. And then on top of that, we have our own staff to think about. We're no different from any other company. We employed 600 people. We had, at any one time, we could have had over 300 on furlough. And we've got no one left on furlough. We've sadly made 40 to 50 redundancies where we've had to restructure. We're having to remarry the people who stayed and worked who are pretty exhausted with the people who were on long-term furlough and frightened about the future of their job. And getting back into that working family that we like to think we are is quite a challenge at the moment, blending everybody back together, but we'll get there. So we've had challenges on our outward-facing and challenges on our inward-facing. And that would be a pretty good summary of what the last 18 months has been like.
And finally, Stephen, a question we like to ask all of our guests. Can you give us your wish list, your 3 wishes for the future of racing?
My overriding wish would be that everybody in the future can get as much fun and enjoyment and passionate engagement in the sport like those of us on this call have today. And So the serious side of that's a genuine sentiment. The serious side is racing has got to remain relevant to the next generation, and that's quite a big challenge as the horse becomes less relevant in society than it was